Hello, everyone. My name is Cassie Cole, and I'm the primary researcher for this study titled Everyone's Business, How Downtown Eugene Businesses Responded to Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. To provide some background for this research, this study uses critical race theory and Asian critical theories. Critical race theory is a critique of white standards on society. It calls out injustice and racial inequality through lived experiences. Asian critical theories is a division of critical race theory focusing specifically on the Asian and Asian American experience. The Black Lives Matter movement has been present for nearly a decade. Most recently, the murder of George Floyd in 2020 sparked an international outcry, creating international-wide attention and support as well. However, this issue has been heavily politicized and divisive in the United States, and a very sensitive topic as well. The Stop Asian Hate movement is sparked by COVID-19 anti-Asian sentiment, with people looking for a scapegoat with which to blame the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has led to a rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, most recently not most recently, but most significantly with the Atlanta spa shootings in 2021, where 6 Asian American women lost their lives. Activism in businesses is very important for businesses to pick a side in movements or to pick an opinion, a point to stand with. Studies have found that businesses who pick a side or something to stand for, they get more customers, and those customers are more loyal to them as well. And so it's important for businesses to have brand responsibility and to create representation among their customers as well as their employees. And sometimes businesses follow trends, sometimes they follow what they believe is risky but maybe profitable. But either way, activism is a strong point for businesses. And that's what we'll be looking at today. I have 3 research questions here. 1, what incentivized downtown Eugene businesses to support the Black Lives Matter movement? 2, how did downtown Eugene business owners express their support of the Black Lives Matter movement? And finally, how may downtown Eugene business owners' support for the Black Lives Matter movement differed from support for the Stop Asian Hate movement? To look at my methods, I used mixed methods, surveys, and phone interviews. I reached out to 90 downtown Eugene businesses to fill out a 25-question survey regarding social movements and their response to those movements. And the businesses were invited to participate in a follow-up phone interview to discuss their survey responses in further depth. And those phone interviews were about 15 to 20 minutes, where I would just ask them follow-up questions and learn more about their perspective. And it's very important for me to withhold or to maintain importance of business and research anonymity. In this study, for the businesses, I wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable and safe to say whatever they felt like saying, to say their true opinion without worrying about the public hearing that opinion and that affecting their business's stance or that their businesses support. And then researcher anonymity as well. I am an Asian American woman. I didn't want my racial minority status to affect how these businesses responded and what their answers were. I didn't want them to feel compelled to respond in a certain way. And so I made sure that they only saw my name and heard my voice. And my name is white passing and my voice is white passing. I don't have any vocal accents. And so in this way, I was able to protect my identity and the identity of the businesses and make sure that my respondents and my research findings were as unbiased as possible. So now we go into the findings. We'll start with our first research question: what incentivized downtown Eugene businesses to support the Black Lives Matter movement? You can see here a demographic profile for both my survey and interview participants. And then as we go into the response for this first question, I'll look at my interview responses. I found a lot of people who were interested in personal stories and talking about how personal stories are something for them to learn from, to take something from that. People wanted to hear personal stories, and that's what incentivized them to participate in the Black Lives Matter movement. People also wanted to participate when the movement aligned with their own morals, their own ideas. People who are inspired by like-minded people, or when a movement aligns with their feelings or emotions. That's when people are more likely to get involved with the Black Lives Matter movement. The next research question: how did downtown Eugene business owners express their support for the Stop or the Black Lives Matter movement? And you can see here there were a range of actions, a range of forms of support. Here, I classified support in 2 ways. So there's active and passive forms of support. Passive forms are things that do not necessarily require as much time or energy, things such as placing signs on your business, donating to a cause, posting on social media, things like that were generally not as action heavy, but action forms of support for things like attending protests, hiring Black employees, doing things like others. So and one respondent in the other category said that she printed Black Lives Matter masks in support for the cause. So these are more active things that may require more time, more money, more effort than some passive acts. And so some interviewees, when asked how they support the Black Lives Matter movement, one interviewer mentioned that they wanted to be educating and helping the community learn where to find information on social movements, Black Lives Matter, and others as well. And so making sure that the community not only has ways of showing their support, but helping them learn more about it, helping them find resources if they want to learn more. Another respondent said that they put their company through training to help their clients and their customers and employees realize that underneath it's all that we have inherent bias, and to make sure that people realize that and then move forward from that. How can we move forward from there? And so our third research question, how many downtown Eugene business owners' support for the Black Lives Matter movement differed from support for the Stop Asian Hate movement? And so this is a bar chart of the support for Stop Asian Hate movements. The support for Stop Asian Hate overall was less than support for Black Lives Matter. So 13 out of 21 respondents supported the Stop Asian Hate movement, while 18 out of 21 supported Black Lives Matter. And this is a chart of what the 13 participants did. And so an overwhelming amount of people participated in more passive actions, supporting businesses, posting on social media, donating, are more things that don't require as much time. No one attended any protests, compared to this Black Lives Matter chart again that I showed earlier. More of a range between passive and active actions of support. So a comparison between the two here. Discussion and conclusion. What do these findings mean? So I found three major trends in my findings, one being awareness. And awareness is what builds social movements. A successful social movement must have awareness. So I talked about Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. More people supported Black Lives Matter. And when asked why they did, the interviewees explained that they hadn't heard about Stop Asian Hate. They didn't know it was a movement. One person thought it was just a phrase. And so creating awareness is what creates attention. Another respondent had said that they hadn't known about the movement, but if they had, they would have supported it. And so it's really important for people to know about these movements. Awareness is perhaps underrated, but very, very, very significant in creating momentum. One respondent said, I just hadn't heard nearly as much about Stop Asian Hate as I did Black Lives Matter. So media coverage, discussions with peers, it's critical to creating that momentum and creating an international movement like Black Lives Matter. And we'll discuss more of that in the next slide as well. But this ties back into critical race theory and Asian critical theories, with the invisibility of racial minorities. Specifically, Asian Americans are often seen stereotypically as demure, on the side, and more willing to go with what is happening. And that's why people believe that's how that stereotype goes, and they expect Asian Americans to be pushed off to the side. And that's why when a movement like Stop Asian Hate happens, they aren't get paid attention to as much, just because they're always been pushed off to the side. People don't notice it as much as Black Lives Matter, which is a movement that has been more prevalent for a longer amount of time. And so awareness is built on media sensationalism, and part of that media sensationalism came from violence. The Black Lives Matter movement was covered, especially in terms of property damage, violence as well, with destroying property, with hurting people. And these are harmful stereotypes of violence. Social movements like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate are representatives of the communities that are pushing these movements. So Black Lives Matter represents the Black community, and Stop Asian Hate represents the Asian American community. And so these movements are meant to be as positive as a representation as possible, but media sensationalism pushed this negative view of Black Lives Matter. And so although it was negative press, it did get Black Lives Matter more attention. One respondent mentioned that, I think it's particularly sad that you have this one thing that didn't have the time to make a lot of news, that it was drowned out by this other thing that was even worse, that made a lot of news. And so that respondent was discussing Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. While Stop Asian Hate needed attention, Black Lives Matter was worse. You had George Floyd, you have this continuous violence against Black Americans. And that just takes precedence in the media, takes precedence in people's minds to focus on more over Stop Asian Hate. And unfortunately, it drowns out the other instances of violence, the other instances of racial minorities and minorities in the United States crying out for help. Again, going back to critical race theory and how racial minorities are pushed down where they're invisible, they're in the background and you don't really hear them unless one big thing happens. And so Black Lives Matter has been on the forefront of people's minds. So yes, Black Lives Matter did receive negative press. Fear was used a lot in Black Lives Matter coverage, but it helped gain attention, it helped the movement create awareness. And lastly, the most important factor for a social movement is storytelling. I discussed this earlier about how important it was to respondents to be hearing people's stories. When respondents said, I don't think you can ever argue with somebody's story, and this is true. Somebody's story is their own personal truth, and it's about their lived experiences. And in critical race theory, we discuss how people are sharing their lived experiences despite white society telling them their experiences, if they don't line up with white standards, aren't as important, aren't as prevalent and aren't needed. And so story breaks the cycle of white society. Storytelling breaks the cycle of white society. It allows minority voices to be heard. Through Black Lives Matter, through Stop Asian Hate, people get to tell their personal stories. They get to allow people to create connections and understand what they've been through, even though they've never had those experiences, even if they've never had those experiences themselves. So for example, I spoke to one respondent who was an older white man, and he'd never experienced racial discrimination as an older white man, but he was able to connect to these personal stories because his family is Jewish and they'd received hate mail before, and so they've experienced discrimination. Despite not having racial discrimination, they were able to connect. They were able to understand what it was. He was able to understand what it was like and create that connection, and therefore relate to the movement and want to support the movement because he had experienced a fairly similar situation. And so storytelling really connects the community. It connects stories and lived experiences, and it shows people that they're not truly as different as they may seem, that we are more alike than we think. It takes away invisibility of racial minorities. It brings people together and allows people to be heard, especially in these social movements, this great opportunity for people to tell their stories. This is why storytelling is important. Future research, a larger participant pool to get more survey data, more interviews and longer interviews to get more data as well, qualitative data, and then more anonymity for participants to make them feel that their responses are going to be protected, to make them feel safe, even without collecting names or emails or anything like that. Many thanks to all of these people. Thank you so much to all of you for your help with my research. This is just a wonderful journey. It is such an important project to me, and thank you to all of these people listed on the slide for your support and your help. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation.